Hi folks, again, Professor Seymour. Welcome to this week's QSM 548 Project Management. Hope everybody's doing well this evening. Wonderful. We'll get started. Any questions about any of the assignments or any of the work that you're doing individually or collectively as teams before we get started?
Hey, Professor.
Yes.
This is Megan Holmes. I just wanted to let you know I'm online with my phone. I just don't have my laptop to connect to it.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Glad you could make it. Okay, folks. Any other needs to be addressed before we initiate into the lecture? Okay. All right. So over the last few weeks, we've talked about the initiating and the planning and resource allocation that are important and valuable steps in the course of managing a project or developing a project, and how the preparation work is vitally important. Tonight we want to talk about how do you execute a plan. Once the plan is executed, how do you monitor the progress of your project? If there are changes to be made, how do you control those? How do you implement those? What does the governance structure look like for change management or change control, excuse me, not change management, change control? And how do we bring projects to closure? So without further ado, we'll begin our slide deck. So last week we talked about, again, the resource questions related to HR and staff and the human capital piece. We talked about effective communication strategies, how important they are. Effective beginning, prior to initiation, through the project, and at the conclusion, and the best ways to do that, and how to consistently execute a high-end, high-level communications plan. We also focused in on the area of procurement. How do we obtain those additional resources that we need in support of our project? And what particular configuration of steps within the project, timeline and guidance, and how we manage that. Looking at the cost of our project and how do we maintain quality. So let's move on. So in the Project Management Institute, there is a significantly heavy approach on the planning phase. And particularly when when requirements for our project are very well developed and clearly defined and agreed to by all key parties in the project, and also within the full scope of the project. Give you a little illustration here. So again, at the beginning, project initiation, small change. We start looking at making some investment when we're executing the planning phase of our project. Spending the resources. So at the beginning, when we're looking at planning our project, those efforts are, generally speaking, more minor in nature and minor in cost. As we continue the journey, you can see that the implications of value of changes and potentially errors or omissions as the project is underway, become extremely more costly. So let's talk about monitoring and control functions. So how do we do what we call an integrated control? How do we control the scope, the schedule, and the cost? Again, looking at monitoring and controlling these different types of risks and so forth, and administering procurement, as the slide indicates there. So when we talk about change requests, these need to be handled judiciously, expeditiously, and with great care, because when we're talking about a change request, this is after a project has been launched. This is some aspect or some component of the team is looking to make a change to something that had already previously been agreed to. So what you want to do is you want to make sure the procedures to make changes are well documented, and what's the approval strategy? What's the chain of approval to see through those particular requests? And what's the process, and who is able to ultimately vote and approve those? With any change request, you want to make sure that the benefits have been thoroughly evaluated, and what's its impact on cost, time, and the scope of the project should all be considered as you look at these change requests. Once the changes are approved and everything has been documented, this becomes a new baseline for the project, depending on the effects of the change. So when we're looking at various types of charts and graphs for monitoring and control and reporting back out, you see various types of samples here. Here we've got a comparison between earned value and planned value over a span or a scope of time in weeks versus dollars here in the top one. On the one below here is the work allocation by resource and their capacity. So these are individuals. This is the time range. It's done in weeks, and where the work is being done by which particular resources, and you can see how it is color-coded here. And this is a sampling of a Gantt chart, which is most of, you would see Gantt charts out of Microsoft Project, and it's really good at coordinating projects with tasks using work breakdown structure. It does levels and it reports up percentage done. It's really a sophisticated tool and a very useful tool for monitoring projects. This is just another dashboard that talks about, a project. So it talks about, if this, and this is phase one, so this has a period ending of October 2012. Describes what the project is. What are the major accomplishments that are to date? What might be the challenges that are identified? So for example, in this particular instance, data migration is being delayed, and they've only got a 25% completion rate due to bandwidth or personnel to do the work. So again, milestones, start date, end date. Where was a previous report? In this particular case, the line with the replacement was in green. Now it is in red. again, as you can see going across this particular milestone. And as you look down here, the overall project health is red, and that means a deadline has been missed. So they missed a September 1 deadline to complete data migration, and as indicated above, they're only at a 25% completion. And this report's as of this report's as of October. So this is about 60 days late for a missed deadline. So the goals here are indicators of where they're at. Resource utilization, what kind of change requests have been requested or submitted, and how many have been approved or denied. As you can see, there have been 0 change requests at this point. As you can see, the 1.9, almost 2.0 million, $2 million, excuse me, have been allocated to this project, and the spend so far is about 1.2, almost 1.3. And this is the you can see is expenditures. This cycle, total project expenditures, again, balance and so forth. Again, very robust dashboard. There's a lot here, and reporting out of in projects is very, very important. Does it need to be this complex? No, but it needs to be appropriate to the project you're involved in and what the key constituencies of your project expect to see and how they expect to see it. So there's a couple of different ways to track your budget, and one of those, looking at what we call EVM, which is Earned Value Management, and this looks at measuring cost and performance against a schedule to look at what variances may or may not exist. And TCPI, which is calculating the cost of performance of the remaining work, what's left to be done. And as you can see, the indicator, the project management board has 12 different formulas to track cost, schedule, and budget process. And they are in greater depth in the textbook. So when we talk about executing a project plan, we're talking about putting the right people in place. How do we manage the team? How does the work actually get done? And looking at everything that was developed in the planning phase, how do we execute those plans? How do they get complete? So when we look at, the level of activity here on the vertical axis with respect to the timeline of the project, we look at as we initiate processes, you can see there's various parts of the work effort that need to be done. Then we begin the planning phase. When we get into the executing of processes in the controlling process, you can see there's a lot of effort and work that needs to be done at this particular point. And then as we begin rolling into the closing processes and ultimately finishing in the final phase. So when we're talking about closure functions, we're talking about those tasks and activities that bring us to a level of completion or closure for the project. Ultimately, obtaining final acceptance from the chain of command, our project sponsor, our customers, completing out and finalizing and closing out contracts, invoices, and resolving any financial and any legal matters that may have developed or reared their head during the previous stages of the project. And ultimately developing a final report and a report of execution. Also capturing lessons learned and transferring organizational process assets and so forth to the appropriate end users, and making sure that the new process has been fully vetted and implemented throughout the organization. Again, as the project winds down, reassigning those team members and back to other tasks. And again, obtaining customer feedback and satisfaction. We see a lot of this in software and computer development, but agile project management allows teams to deliver projects in a piece by piece or component philosophy, and allow them to make quick adjustments if and as needed. Again, in larger, more complex projects, sometimes this is very useful to get the customer what they need more efficiently and with less cost. Some of the traditional approaches are what we call the waterfall development, or the traditional approach. In other words, we look at what our requirements are. We talk to our constituents, our clients, our customers, our champions, and what do they need? What are the expected challenges that they're facing, and what do they need resolution to or solutions to or new processes for? Then begins the design phase. And when we're looking in the design phase, we're looking at how do we accomplish what's important? How do we accomplish, or designing processes and a plan to help us reach the outcomes that are desired by our clients, our champions, and our customers. Putting it into development, testing the processes, and then once the processes have been tested and they are up and running, how do we maintain them? So here's a comparison between the waterfall model versus what we call an agile model. On the left-hand side, we're looking at what's the concept, how do we develop, then the steps towards initiating a strategy, analyzing the steps, the processes involved, doing our appropriate design, build, test, and deploy. That's where again, cascading from the top down. Whereas an agile kind of puts these steps a little more together. So where both agree is that, one step for each of those is conception. The Agile takes the initiation and the analysis and combines those tasks together and runs them simultaneously or within very effective analysis. And then we move to design and construction, designing the process and building with a very tight window, again, to be very nimble. And then the testing and deployment are handled together. And as you can see, it makes it more efficient, or more nimble, I guess is a better word. So, if we look at the overview of an agile timeline or an agile steps towards it. So as you can see, with respect to, for example, the project owner, we get input from all of the end users, customers, team, and stakeholders. So for example, what may be a product backlog, for example, here. We're going to do this is what we call a sprint. And the team selects of what is here, how much can they commit to within the time frame of the sprint. And the sprint planning meeting is a two-part meeting. We look at the tasks and the features. Then there's what we call a Scrum Master, and no changes in the duration towards the goal. So we look at daily meetings, review, and look at how we can increase the potentiality of shipping products. Again, so input, decisions of what can be done during this time frame, daily meetings and updates, review of progress, and then obviously what we call retrospective, looking back and seeing how well we did. So this is a Scrum is a highly collaborative team. This is a team that works well together. It's not a very large size team, 5 to 7 members is typically what we would see. The backlog are, the list of features, again, what we may be looking at, deciding what we can complete. The daily meetings are short in nature. They look at risk, assess risk, and they also address assessment of the progress of the project. And again, these are generally delivered in very brief spurts or sprints of one week to maybe up to a month. They're not long by any stretch of the imagination. So when you're looking at backlog requirements, as it says here, you want to take a look at them and put them in some sort of valued ranking system or prioritization. So again, as you look at, because you're not going to take everything on in a sprint, you're going to decide what you can complete in that time frame. So for example here, this is a story of, via an interview with the end user. And as the first post-it note says, a customer should be able to place an order online. All right. So again, the criteria for this feature is written on the back of the card. This is the basis for test cases. Okay. So on the front of this, it's actually a card. It's not a post-it note. What the expectation is. And then the criteria of what is necessary on the back, as you can see below here, flipped over. So the credit cards that they accept online. So as it says here, it accepts MasterCard, Visa, and American Express. It does not accept Diners Club or Discover. They need to test with the credit card vendors and check a validation routine. Other options for online are PayPal. They also want to make sure that their gift certificate codes and their group codes work as well. So looking at what we're looking to do and what we need to do, we must accept each story. Passing test cases is just not enough to indicate acceptance. The owner of this must accept each story. So in this photograph, you can see a dashboard or a working board for a team, probably in a daily meeting or in a planning strategy of what they can accept and can't do. Again, a timeline. They've got some rules of the road. And again, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 folks in this photograph, which is what, we say 5 to 7 folks. So Matthew's asking a question, does each card represent a different idea? Yes. Or actually, different user story is more realistic. So let's go back and look at that again, so each story, so in this case, the ability to order online is one. There could be a series of them. He's asking, do they sometimes combine similar stories? I would think it would depend on the priority. So when we look at this concept of what is lean, when we incorporate the lean philosophy into agile project management, we're looking at, we look at 7 principles that are a focus of what lean strategies hope to accomplish, which is the elimination of waste, to increase learning, how do we decide as late as possible or just in time, how do we deliver our product or our service as quickly as possible, empower the team, build integrity into the team, and see the entirety of what we're hoping to accomplish. Another aspect that you'll hear about in Six Sigma and Lean is a Kanban, and this is a workboard that talks about can be used in an agile project or other ways. So, for example, there's a to-do list. There's work that needs to be ongoing, work that may need to be accomplished or is completed. Again, some of these efforts here, and then the verifying process and so forth. Again, it just keeps an update of where each step of the project is and what's going on. So let's talk a little bit about where you're at in relationship, again, to the phases of project management and how they correlate directly to your MPBs. So again, we're looking at, as you initiated, as you began your launch of orientation just a few months ago, you were looking at potential projects, and again, the selection for your teams was the best project, and then you've been gathering so then moving into probably where you are at this point is, moving from the initiating to the planning stage, is defining scope and problem and working on the different pieces of your scope and problem statement and who is your champion team and so forth. Once you've gotten that far, you'll see as we continue on in the journey over the next several courses, and as you begin moving towards the next MPP2 and things like that, you'll start to move and look at experience of what the measure and analyze and control activities are about, and what are the tools that are associated with that, and begin to look at what are some of the potential deliverables or initial deliverables, and you may look at the way in which you want to refine the scope of your project based on some of the initial results. And then as you move further into the semester, again, looking at the development course and others, you'll be moving towards looking at feedback of your projects and getting the work posted up into the tracker. Again, progress reviews with your champion and the quality activities within your team. And then at the end, as you approach graduation in MPP3, the champion acceptance of your project, and then final approval of the academic learning and final presentation of your projects, which I can tell you was a terrific night for the groups that I've been involved with over the last many years. That final night is fantastic to look at and know how much work has been put into the various projects, and to see the teams present that MPB to members of the faculty and maybe others to celebrate that success. It's really a terrific evening. So when we look at, before I move on, any questions on how the connectivity of project management and its relationship to your MPB project, or the steps that will be ahead of you with respect to that? Okay. So we're looking at, again, project management, the phases of teams, again with define, measure, analyze, improve, control, which is DMAIC and Lean Six Sigma. And how does the curriculum ferret itself out? So for example, in the MPB1, which you had your intro course in your first mentoring cycle, and have gone through performance management and strategic planning, you've done basically you're defining and you're forming and storming your team, and again looking at initiating and planning. You're now beginning to move into the norming and performing, which will get you to the execution piece. And in your next course, benchmarking, you'll begin to look at ways in which you can use data to compare yourself externally and internally to see how your results are based off of your execution of your project. And then in the final phase, you'll start moving towards the closure piece, which is looking at the financial piece, supplier management, and finance course, and mentoring of within the MPB3 for that final set of presentations to your, from an academic perspective and for your senior champion perspective. So what do we have left to do? Next week, each team will be afforded about 20 minutes to do your presentations. We'll have time for questions within each group, feedback from colleagues, and those presentations need to be posted ahead of class for me, please, just before class they do. All right. So let's just go through the final deliverables for assignment 6. So we want to make sure we have the problem statement, the key stakeholder, your process map, your work breakdown structure, okay. We will not, all teams will need to work through the regular time. We'll be fine with that. So just give me 1 second, please. Just want to bring up the syllabus real quick. So just a reminder, your individual paper is due tonight by midnight, and assignment 6 is due by next week. So the final briefing is here. This is what I wanted to get my hands on. So you'll look at the slides that you've submitted, and I've looked at your slide decks, and they're in good shape. So this will be the final submission and presentation during online class. Okay. So what I'm looking for is the title of the team, a slide with the title of the team, problem statement, champion listing, your key stakeholder registry. Be prepared to talk about communication engagement strategies as appropriate. Your flow chart, your customer requirements matrix. I want to hear from you on your customer and champion requirements, your particular work breakdown structure, your QA procedures, which is what is due previously, and lessons learned. So you'll make a formal, next week you'll make a formal presentation. There are no individual assignments next week, and there will be no discussion questions next week, so that you can finalize the preparation for this. What I want is each team member needs to participate and present part of the presentation. The grade will not only be based on the quality of the PowerPoint, each of your presentation skills collectively, the collective knowledge of the project, and the ability to respond to questions at the end of the presentation. And we'll decide the order next week, since there's only 3 groups. Each team will have 20 minutes, and then, a few minutes, 5 to 10 minutes after that for presentation, for questions and feedback. Does everybody understand what's expected? Are there questions? All right, I'm gonna remain online for any sort of team discussions that you may want to talk about, any of the in preparation for next week's presentations. But I'm just going to stop here for the lecture piece so that I can